In this video, we're continuing our tour of funeral industries around the world and we're heading to Israel, a little land with a big land problem. The clash of burial crisis with an ultra-orthodox religious powers. But need creates change and Israel's funeral industry is no different. Please remember to like and subscribe if you learned something new. It is much appreciated. Now let's talk about the Israeli funeral industry. Facts and statistics. Israel has a population of around 9.5 million people, depending on who you ask, with the life expectancy of around 82 years old. 74% identify as Jewish, 18% Muslim, 2% Christian, and 6% other. As far as geography goes, it is on the smaller side. This is it compared to Tassie for us Aussies, and this is it next to Taiwan. And remember our last video where we spoke about Singapore? Well, Israel isn't quite that small, and this is it next to Denmark and the UK, and next to Central America. So you get the idea, and here it is on the map. The next thing you need to know for this video to make sense is the basics of Jewish burial. Now every Jewish sect will say something slightly different, but as this video is on Israel, we're going to look at the more conservative stance. So Jews believe that it is disrespectful to leave the body unburied, so they must be buried as quickly as possible, ideally within 24 hours. There is no wake or open casket viewing. It is mandated by Jewish law that the body be washed, shrouded, and placed in a simple casket box, preferably made of pine with no metal. However, in Israel, no casket is used. The body is simply shrouded. This body must be put directly into the soil so the body can decompose quickly and naturally. Embalming, cremation, burial in a vault, above ground mausoleums, crypt, or any other alternative to traditional ground burial is strictly forbidden according to Jewish law. So with 74% of Israelis being Jewish and another 18% Muslim who have similar burial practices, that's a minimum of 92% of Israel's population requiring traditional burial and nothing else. Now I'm sure you can see where this is heading, so let's move on. The right to burial. According to Israeli law, Israel's National Insurance Institute covers the cost of standard funerals for citizens and residents buried near their homes and tourists who pass away in Israel. The National Insurance Institute does not cover burial costs for non-Israelis who pass away abroad but wish to be buried in Israel, or for Israelis who have lived outside Israel for many years and have not kept up with their payments. These people are allowed to be buried in Israel under strict conditions, but they will need to pay for it themselves. Now, by standard, the government means the cost of a burial plot in the nearest available and open cemetery, refrigeration of a body for up to 24 hours or 48 hours if the death occurs on the Sabbath, transportation of bodies from the hospital or place of death to the local cemetery, washing and preparing bodies for burial, the shroud, and temporary gravesite signs. The government will not pay for exclusive plots or plots in closed cemeteries, ground burial rather than layered or niche burial if that is the standard burial method in that local cemetery, and we'll talk about that later, transportation of bodies from locations beyond the burial society's jurisdiction, transportation by private hearse, publication of death notices, or preparation and installation of headstones. If you are not Israeli but are Jewish and wish to be buried in Israel, you'll be looking at paying around $30,000 for the burial plot alone, and at least another $20,000 for permits, transport, and all the rest. And many cemeteries over there are very picky about how a funeral is conducted, so you may or may not be able to have your rabbi from home conduct the funeral, most likely not. And often the funeral must be said in Hebrew and with no women in attendance. Many will not allow you to be buried there if you've been embalmed, which most often you need to have done to be repatriated by flight. See our video on that. Not all cemeteries in Israel have these conditions, but many do, particularly those with a more religious meaning to the Jewish community. Burial towers. Back in the 1990s, the Israeli government was already starting to talk about the burial problem and lack of space. They knew that having an entire population that for generation after generation needed to be buried with strict religious instruction was going to make it very difficult to come up with a solution. And over the decades, many ideas were thrown up and shot down. Until the idea of a burial tower came up. It sounded perfect, and it wouldn't be the first in the world. But how to make it Jew-friendly? Jewish law stipulates that a Jew must be buried in the soil, and that soil must be connected to the earth. Well, as you can see, this is what they came up with. These 22-meter high structures feature circular ramps, a terrace-like facade with vegetation, and each floor has an opening on the side for fresh air to get in. Very important for visitors and very important for decomposition. The building has soil on each level for burial, and the towers have pipes filled with dirt inside each column so that the layers are still technically connected to the ground. This was a hard sell to the ultra-Orthodox community, of whom they needed permission from to be able to do it, but eventually they said okay. So they were on board, the process was started, and in 2014 the first burial tower was opened in Yarkon Cemetery on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. This cemetery is one of the only cemeteries in that region that provides free government burial. Hence when I mentioned earlier that they need to be buried in a layered or niche burial to get free burial, that's what I meant. It is believed that this tower will hold another 250,000 bodies and provide the region with another 25 years of breathing room to come up with more ideas. Underground tunnels. And they did come up with more ideas. This time reviving the ancient custom of underground catacomb-like burial. In 2018, they started work drilling an underground tunnel 1 kilometre long deep under the Old Jerusalem Cemetery, the same way they would dig for an underground subway tunnel. Now, they had to use as much space as they could down there as possible, and all bodies need to have a connection to the earth. For that, they kept the numbers of the graves to those that can line the walls and floor that touch the earth. Where it has used concrete to fortify the chamber, it has left holes in the side to make sure there is always a direct link to the bedrock. By October 2019, the first third of the tunnel had been completed and the first 8,000 bodies could be moved in, while they kept making headway on the rest of the tunnel. Now, it should be said, this isn't some dark, damp cave kind of setup. The tunnels are brightly lit, air-conditioned and lined with Jerusalem stone, and elevators bring visitors to graves as deep as 160 feet underground. Large reddish orbs serve as the permanent light fixture that you would see in a synagogue. The area is wheelchair accessible and airy, with balconies overlooking multiple levels of graves. While some visitors might find the experience eerie, one major advantage of this layout is that funeral goers are protected from the harsh Jerusalem sun, which not infrequently is blamed for fainting during funerals, so that's a plus. The big problem with all this though is that while the tunnel can cater for more bodies than a regular cemetery, just this 1 kilometre stretch alone costs $77 million and expected to run out of space by 2040, possibly sooner. So they will have to extend it again and again with an inflated price tag. The future. All these alternative ideas are great, no doubt. But city planners and the government are very aware that you can only build so many towers, with many saying they're already an eyesore and taking up space. And you can only extend a tunnel so far, as much of the land Israel sits on is not the most suitable and prone to collapsing under even the best scaffolding. Many are saying ossuaries are the next potential option, meaning having the body buried until it decomposes and then digging up the bones and putting them in niches in specialised buildings. But the Religious Service Ministry, which controls licensing for burial societies, needs to sign off on these things, and they are appalled at the idea, calling it ludicrous and grotesque and unworkable, and they don't want to hear a bar of it. The other obstacle is the Israeli Health Ministry's long-held current ban on disinterring bodies, another regulation that would need to be changed. And for more info on the ossuary idea, please look for the article that I put in the description. It is a really interesting read. Israel faces many issues when it comes to body disposal. Land scarcity, increasing population, religious pressure, and the influx of citizens from other countries who feel they have a right to be buried in the country. And those issues are only going to get worse as time goes on. They have already found many religious and legal loopholes to be able to do what they've done, and it is impressive. But it is only a short-term fix, so it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. Let us know in the comments which country you would like us to look at next. And with that, go talk death.